It was another ordinary Tuesday night for David, a 34-year-old computer programmer who worked from his laptop at a small coffee shop downtown. He'd been coming to this same spot for 3 years now, always choosing the table by the window where the Wi-Fi was strongest. The place wasn't fancy, just your typical neighborhood coffee shop with mismatched chairs and the smell of roasted beans in the air. David was deep into his work, typing away on a new project about quantum computing when something made him look up. There, sitting at the corner table in the back, was a woman he'd never seen before. And trust me, he would have remembered her. She looked to be in her early 30s, but there was something different about her. Her skin was so pale it almost seemed to glow under the warm coffee shop lights. Her hair was long and dark, perfectly straight like it had been ironed. But it was her eyes that really caught his attention. They were larger than normal eyes should be, dark as midnight, and they seemed to catch the light in a way that didn't make sense. David tried to go back to his work, but he kept finding himself glancing over at her. She sat perfectly still, not moving like most people do when they're relaxing. Her hands were folded on the table, and she wasn't looking at a phone or reading a book. She was just sitting there, watching. And then he realized what was making him so uncomfortable. She was watching him. Every time he looked up, those dark eyes were focused directly on him. Not in a casual way, like when you accidentally make eye contact with a stranger. This was different. It was like she was studying him, memorizing every detail of his face. David felt his heart start beating faster. He closed his laptop and pretended to check his phone, hoping she would look away. But when he glanced up again, she was still staring. This time, she didn't even blink when their eyes met. The coffee shop suddenly felt too quiet. David noticed that the usual evening crowd was smaller than normal. There were only a few other people scattered around, and they all seemed focused on their own things. Nobody else seemed to notice the strange woman in the corner. David decided he'd had enough. He packed up his laptop and headed toward the door, planning to leave as quickly as possible. But just as he reached for the door handle, he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me?" The voice was soft but clear, with an odd rhythm to it. Each word was pronounced perfectly, like someone reading from a script. David turned around slowly. The woman was standing right behind him. Up close, she was even stranger. Her movements were too smooth, too calculated. When she walked, it was like she was gliding across the floor. And those eyes, they seemed to look right through him. "Yes," David managed to say, his voice coming out smaller than he intended. "You are David Chen, correct?" she asked. David's blood went cold. He'd never told anyone in this coffee shop his full name. He always paid with cash and kept to himself. How could she possibly know who he was? "I'm sorry, do I know you?" he asked, taking a small step backward. The woman tilted her head slightly, like a bird studying an interesting insect. "My name is Elena. I have been observing your work." "My work?" David felt confused and scared at the same time. "What work? I don't understand." Elena stepped closer, and David noticed she didn't seem to breathe the way normal people do. Her chest barely moved, and when she spoke, her breath didn't fog up, even though the coffee shop was cold. "Your project involving quantum consciousness interfaces," she said matter-of-factly. "The research you have been conducting for the past 8 months. It is quite impressive." David felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. His quantum computing project was something he worked on privately, at home, in his spare time. He'd never published anything about it. He'd never even told his friends or family what he was working on. It was just a personal hobby, a way to explore some wild theories about how human consciousness might interact with quantum mechanics. "How do you know about that?" he whispered. Elena's expression didn't change. "I have been watching you, David, studying your patterns, learning about your capabilities." The way she said it was so casual, like she was talking about the weather. but the words made David's skin crawl.
Watching me? What do you mean, watching me?
I observe. I gather information. I assess potential. David looked around the coffee shop. The few other customers were still there, but none of them seemed to be paying attention to this conversation. It was like Elena existed in a bubble that only he could see into. Potential for what? He asked. For the first time, Elena's perfect composure seemed to crack slightly. Her head tilted the other way, and her dark eyes narrowed. That remains to be determined, she said after a long pause. David felt panic rising in his chest. This whole situation was wrong. Nothing about this woman made sense. The way she moved, the way she talked, the things she knew about him. He needed to get out of there. I have to go, he said quickly, reaching for the door again.
Of course, Elena replied. I will see you again soon, David.
There was something in the way she said soon that made David's hands shake as he pushed open the door. He didn't look back as he hurried to his car, but he could feel those dark eyes watching him through the window. As he drove home, David couldn't stop thinking about Elena. Who was she? How did she know about his private research? And why did being around her feel like standing next to something that wasn't quite human? He told himself he was being paranoid. Maybe she was a student who had somehow heard about his work. Maybe it was all just a weird coincidence. But deep down, David knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger and much stranger than he could imagine. That night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that somewhere out there, Elena was still watching him. And for the first time in his life, David felt like he wasn't alone in the universe. But instead of being comforting, that thought terrified him more than anything else. David thought maybe he'd never see Elena again. He hoped that weird encounter at the coffee shop was just a one-time thing. But he was wrong. Very wrong. The next morning, David decided to grab breakfast at his usual diner before heading to work. He'd been going to Tony's diner for 2 years, always ordering the same thing, scrambled eggs and toast. As he walked in, he waved at Betty, the waitress who knew his order by heart, but as he slid into his favorite booth, his stomach dropped. There she was, Elena, sitting 3 tables away wearing the same dark clothes from the night before. She wasn't eating anything, just sitting there with her hands folded, staring at him with those impossibly dark eyes. David's appetite vanished. He left money on the table and hurried out without ordering. As he walked to his car, he could feel her, watching him through the window. When he looked back, she raised her hand in a small wave. It should have been a normal gesture, but something about it made his skin crawl. At work, David tried to focus on his regular programming job. He worked for a small tech company downtown, writing software for local businesses. It was boring, but steady work that paid the bills while he pursued his quantum computing research at home. Around lunchtime, David's co-worker Jake stopped by his desk. "Hey, want to grab lunch at that new sandwich place?" Jake asked. David nodded, grateful for the distraction. Maybe getting out with a friend would help him forget about the strange woman. The sandwich shop was busy, filled with office workers on their lunch break. David and Jake found a small table near the back and started talking about their weekend plans. For the first time that day, David began to relax. Then Jake's expression changed. He was looking over David's shoulder with a confused frown. "Who's that woman?" Jake asked. "She's been staring at you this whole time." David's heart sank. He turned around slowly, already knowing what he would see. Elena was sitting alone at a table by the window. She wasn't eating. She wasn't drinking. She was just watching him. "I don't know," David lied. "Probably nobody." But Jake kept looking. "That's weird, man. She hasn't blinked once since I noticed her. And she's got this really intense stare." David turned back to face Jake. But he could feel Elena's eyes burning into the back of his head. They finished their sandwiches quickly and left. As they walked back to the office, David glanced over his shoulder. Elena was gone. That evening, David decided to skip his usual routine. Instead of going to the coffee shop, he went straight home. He lived in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building. As he climbed the stairs, he felt relieved to be in familiar territory. David made dinner and settled down to work on his quantum computing project. For a few hours, he lost himself in the complex equations and theories. This research was his passion, his way of exploring the deepest mysteries of reality. He'd been working on the idea that human consciousness might exist partially in quantum states, allowing it to interact with reality in ways science didn't fully understand yet. Around 10 o'clock, David realized he needed milk for his morning coffee. There was a small grocery store just down the block that stayed open late. He grabbed his wallet and headed out. The store was nearly empty. David picked up the milk and some snacks, chatting briefly with the cashier about the weather. As he walked outside, he stopped dead in his tracks. Elena was standing across the street under a streetlight. She wasn't hiding or trying to be sneaky. She was just standing there, watching him. When their eyes met, she nodded once like she was acknowledging his presence. David hurried back to his apartment building, his hands shaking as he fumbled with his keys. Once inside, he ran up the stairs and locked his door behind him. He went to his window and carefully looked down at the street. Elena was still there, still watching. David closed the curtains and tried to calm down. Maybe she lived in the neighborhood. Maybe it was just another coincidence. But deep down, he knew better. The next few days were like living in a nightmare. Everywhere David went, Elena appeared. She showed up at his gym while he was working out, sitting on a bench and watching him lift weights. She was at the grocery store when he went shopping, standing in the produce section without buying anything. She even appeared outside his office building during his lunch break. The worst part was how other people reacted to her, or rather, how they didn't react. David started paying close attention to the people around Elena. In the gym, other members walked right past her without seeming to notice she was there. At the grocery store, employees restocked shelves near her, like she was invisible. Even when she was standing in crowded areas, people seemed to flow around her without really seeing her. But David saw her, crystal clear, and she was always watching him. On Friday evening, David couldn't take it anymore. He marched up to Elena in the coffee shop, his fear replaced by anger and frustration. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, loud enough that other customers looked over. Elena tilted her head in that bird-like way she had. "I am conducting research," she said simply. "Research on what? Why are you following me everywhere?" "I am observing your behavioral patterns, studying your decision-making processes, evaluating your emotional responses to stress." The clinical way she spoke made David's blood run cold. She talked about him like he was a lab rat in an experiment. "You can't just follow people around," David said. "It's illegal. It's stalking." Elena blinked slowly, the first time David had seen her blink at all. "Your legal concepts do not apply to my situation." "What's that supposed to mean?" But Elena didn't answer. She stood up smoothly and walked toward the door. As she passed David, she stopped and spoke quietly. "You should know that your quantum consciousness research is far more significant than you realize," she said. "And you are being watched by more than just me." Then she was gone, leaving David standing alone in the middle of the coffee shop with his heart pounding and his mind racing. Other customers had gone back to their conversations, but David noticed something strange. When he asked the barista if she'd seen the woman he was talking to, she looked confused. "What woman?" she asked. "You were standing there by yourself, talking to nobody." David walked home that night feeling like he was losing his mind. But as he turned the corner to his street, he saw Elena one more time. She was standing under his apartment building, looking up at his window. This time, she wasn't alone. There were two other figures with her, just as pale and strange as she was, and all three of them were watching his apartment with those dark, unblinking eyes. David realized his life had just become much more complicated and dangerous than he'd ever imagined. David couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those three figures standing under his building, looking up at his window with their strange, dark eyes. He kept getting up to check the curtains, but they were gone by midnight. The weekend came and went in a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. David barely left his apartment, ordering food delivery and trying to distract himself with work. But even his quantum computing research couldn't hold his attention. His mind kept wandering back to Elena and her cryptic words about his project being more significant than he realized. By Monday evening, David was a mess. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. He was surviving on coffee and takeout food, and he jumped at every small sound. When he finally forced himself to leave the apartment to get some fresh air, he decided to go to the one place Elena had never appeared, the roof of his building. David's apartment building was old but well-maintained, with a rooftop garden that most residents ignored. It was accessible through a door on the top floor, and David had discovered it during his first week living there. It was peaceful up there, with a view of the city lights and enough space to think clearly. He climbed the stairs slowly, his legs weak from days of barely eating. The rooftop door creaked as he pushed it open and cool night air hit his face. For the first time in days, David felt like he could breathe properly. Then he saw her. Elena was standing at the far edge of the roof, looking out over the city. But something was different about her tonight. Under the moonlight and the glow, from the city below, her pale skin seemed to have an actual light coming from within. Her dark hair moved slightly in the breeze, and when she turned to face him, David gasped. Her eyes were no longer just unusually large and dark. They were filled with tiny points of light, like looking at stars in a night sky. And her face, while still beautiful in a strange way, had subtle differences that became obvious in the moonlight. Her features were too perfect, too symmetrical. No human face was that flawless. "Hello, David," she said in that careful, measured voice he'd come to know and fear. "I have been waiting for you." David's first instinct was to run back downstairs and lock himself in his apartment. But something in Elena's posture was different tonight. She seemed less threatening, more sad. "What are you?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena was quiet for a long moment, looking back out over the city. When she spoke, again her voice had changed. It was still careful and precise, but there was something almost human in it now. "I am not from your world, David. I come from a place very far from here, farther than your astronomers have ever looked." David felt his knees go weak. He'd suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was different. "You're an alien." "That is your word for it, yes." Elena turned to face him fully. "My people have been traveling between worlds for longer than your species has existed. We are explorers, observers, students of the universe. And you've been studying me." Elena nodded. "Your planet has interested us for some time. Your species develops technology very quickly, but you also have something most intelligent species lack." "What's that?" "You have what you call consciousness that exists partially outside normal physical reality. It is rare in the universe. Most intelligent beings are purely physical, but humans exist in multiple dimensions at once. You just don't realize it." David's mind raced. This was exactly what his research had been suggesting, that human consciousness might operate in quantum states that existed beyond normal space-time. "My research," he said suddenly. "That's why you're interested in me?" Elena's strange, star-filled eyes brightened slightly. "Your work is the closest any human has come to understanding the true nature of consciousness. You are mapping something that could change everything." She walked closer to him, and David noticed she moved with that same gliding motion he'd observed before. Up close, he could see that her skin really was glowing faintly, like moonlight on water. "But your research has attracted attention," Elena continued. "Not just from my people. There are others in the universe who hunt consciousness, who consume it for power. They have noticed your planet because of work like yours." David felt cold. Fear wash over him. Consume consciousness? What does that mean? There are beings that feed on the life force of thinking creatures. They travel from world to world, hunting species that have developed consciousness beyond the purely physical. When they find such a species, they harvest all conscious thought, leaving behind empty shells. The way Elena described it made David's stomach turn. "And they're coming here? They are already aware of your world. My people detected their scouts in your solar system 18 months ago. That is why I was sent to study you." Elena walked to a small bench on the roof and sat down with that too smooth motion. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked tired. "My people sent me to determine if humans were worth protecting," she continued. "To see if your consciousness was developed enough to be valuable allies rather than just food." David sat down on the other end of the bench, trying to process everything Elena had told him. "And what did you decide?" Elena looked at him with those starry eyes, and for a moment David thought he saw something almost like sadness in them. "I was supposed to observe and report back without making contact, but your research was too important to ignore. And..." She paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "And I began to experience something my people do not normally feel." "What's that?" "Attachment. To you specifically. To your species in general. My people exist primarily as pure consciousness. We rarely form emotional connections. But living among humans, watching you, learning about you, I began to understand feelings I had never experienced before." David stared at her, hardly believing what he was hearing. "You're saying you developed feelings? For me?" Elena nodded slowly. "This is forbidden among my people. We are meant to remain objective observers. But the more I watched you work, saw your dedication to understanding the universe, witnessed your kindness to others, I found myself wanting to protect you rather than simply study you." She reached into a pocket of her dark clothing and pulled out a small device David had never seen before. It was about the size of a smartphone, but seemed to be made of some kind of crystal that pulsed with inner light. "This is a quantum communicator," Elena said. "It allows me to show you images across space and time." She touched the device, and suddenly the air above it filled with three-dimensional images that looked as real as photographs. David saw a beautiful world with purple skies and silver cities that seemed to float in the clouds. Strange, graceful. Beings moved through the cities, beings that looked similar to Elena, but with variations in their features and the light that emanated from their skin. "This is my home," Elena said softly. "And this is what it looked like before the Devourers found us." The image changed, and David watched in horror as the same beautiful world appeared again, but this time it was dark and lifeless. The floating cities were ruins, and there was no sign of the graceful beings who had lived there. "The Devourers consumed the consciousness of 3 billion of my people," Elena said, her voice barely audible. "Only a few thousand of us escaped to become wanderers among the stars." David felt tears forming in his eyes as he watched the tragic images floating in the air between them. "I'm so sorry." Elena touched the device again, and the images disappeared. "We cannot save my home world, but we can save yours. And David, your research is the key to everything." David barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw images of Elena's destroyed homeworld and imagined Earth looking the same way. Dark, lifeless, empty, When morning came, he felt like he'd been hit by a truck, but his mind was racing with questions. Elena had said his research was the key to saving Earth, but how? His quantum consciousness project was just theoretical work, equations and ideas he played with in his spare time. How could something so abstract help fight beings that consumed entire civilizations? Around noon, David's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at your university lab tonight at 10 p.m. Building will be empty. We have work to do." David stared at the message. Elena wanted to meet at his workplace. The university where he'd done his graduate studies had given him access to their quantum computing lab for his personal research. It was a small privilege. He'd earned by helping professors with their projects, but he'd never told anyone about it. How did Elena know? Of course, he reminded himself, Elena seemed to know everything about his life. That evening, David used his key card to enter the physics building. The hallways were dark and empty, just as Elena had predicted. His footsteps echoed as he walked toward the quantum lab, a high-tech room filled with expensive computers and equipment that most people couldn't even pronounce the names of. David expected to find Elena waiting for him, but the lab was empty when he arrived. He turned on the lights and looked around, wondering if he'd misunderstood the message. Then he heard a soft voice behind him. "Hello, David." He spun around, to find Elena standing in the doorway. But something was different about her tonight. Her pale skin was glowing more brightly than before, and when she moved, David could swear he saw faint traces of light following her movements. "How did you get in here?" David asked. "This building has security cameras everywhere, and you need a key card to get past the front door." Elena smiled, and it was the first time David had seen her make that expression. It was beautiful, but also unsettling because it was too perfect, like a statue coming to life. "Your security systems are designed to detect humans," she said simply. "I exist partially outside your normal physical dimensions. To your cameras and sensors, I am mostly invisible." She walked into the lab, moving between the expensive equipment with confident familiarity. "This is impressive technology for your time period," she said, running her fingers along one of the quantum computers. "But it is still very primitive compared to what your species will need." "Need for what?" David asked. Elena turned to face him, and her expression became serious. "To survive what is coming. David, the Devourers will arrive at your planet within 2 years. My people's calculations are certain. When they come, they will consume the consciousness of every living thing on Earth unless we can stop them." David felt his knees go weak. 2 years. Less than 2 years to save the entire human race. "But how can my research help?" he asked. "I'm just one guy working on theories about consciousness. I don't have any special powers or advanced technology." Elena walked over to one of the computers and placed her hand on its surface. Immediately, the screen lit up with complex equations and diagrams that David had never seen before. The math was so advanced it made his head spin just looking at it. "Your research has been leading you toward a breakthrough you don't yet understand," Elena explained. "Human consciousness exists in quantum states that span multiple dimensions. This makes your species unique in the universe. Most intelligent beings exist only in 3-dimensional space, but humans naturally exist in at least 7 dimensions simultaneously." She touched the computer again, and new images appeared on the screen. David saw what looked like a human brain, but it was connected to swirling patterns of energy that extended far beyond the physical skull. "This is what human consciousness actually looks like when viewed from higher dimensions," Elena continued. "The Devourers can consume 3-dimensional consciousness easily, but multi-dimensional consciousness is much harder for them to digest. It can actually make them sick if they try to feed on it." David stared at the images, trying to understand what Elena was telling him. "So you're saying humans have natural protection against these Devourers?" "Potentially, yes. But only if you learn to use your multidimensional nature consciously. Right now, humans exist in higher dimensions by accident. You're not aware of it, so you can't control it or strengthen it. Elena moved to another computer and began typing with incredible speed. Lines of code appeared on the screen, but it wasn't any programming language David recognized. Your quantum consciousness research is the first step toward teaching humans how to access their higher dimensional nature deliberately, she said. But it needs to be enhanced with technology my people have developed. She pulled out the crystal, device David had seen the night before, and connected it to the computer somehow, even though there was no visible port that should fit it. Immediately, all the computers in the lab began humming with activity. "What are you doing?" David asked, feeling nervous about Elena connecting alien technology to university equipment. "I am upgrading your research with quantum processors that exist partially outside normal space-time," Elena explained. "This will allow you to map human consciousness in all 7 dimensions, not just the 3 you can currently observe." David watched in amazement as his theoretical work began transforming into something far more complex and powerful. Equations he'd struggled with for months were solving themselves. Concepts he'd only dreamed about were becoming concrete reality. But then Elena stopped typing and turned to face him with a serious expression. "David, I must tell you something important. What I am doing right now is forbidden by my people's laws. I was sent to observe, not to interfere. By helping you enhance this technology, I am committing what my people consider treason." "Why are you doing it then?" David asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment, looking down at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than usual. "Because I have developed feelings that my people do not experience. Watching humans, learning about your capacity for love, sacrifice, creativity, I have become attached to your species, and to you specifically." She looked up at David, and he saw something in those star-filled eyes that looked almost human. "My people believe consciousness should exist without emotional attachment. We see emotions as weaknesses that cloud judgment. But living among humans has taught me that emotions can also be a source of strength. Your love for each other, your willingness to sacrifice for strangers, your hope even in hopeless situations, these things make you worth saving." Elena walked closer to David, and he noticed that her glow was pulsing gently, like a heartbeat made of light. "But there is something else you must know. The technology I am giving you comes with a price. To operate quantum consciousness interfaces in 7 dimensions, the operator must exist partially outside normal human reality. Using this technology will change you permanently. You will gain abilities beyond normal human limits, but you will also become something that is no longer entirely human." David felt his heart pounding. "What kind of abilities?" "You will be able to perceive thoughts and emotions across vast distances. You will see reality as it truly exists in higher dimensions. You will be able to communicate directly with consciousness itself, including the consciousness of my people." Elena paused, and David could see she was struggling with what to say next. "But you will also become isolated from normal human experience. Other people will have difficulty relating to you. You will see and understand things that will be impossible to explain to anyone who hasn't undergone the same transformation." She gestured toward the enhanced equipment around them. "This technology can save your world, David, but someone must sacrifice their humanity to operate it. Someone must become a bridge between dimensions to stand against the devourers." David looked around the lab, at all the advanced technology Elena had created, at the equations and diagrams that represented humanity's only hope for survival. Then he looked back at Elena, this beautiful, strange being who had given up everything to help his species. "There's something else, isn't there?" David asked quietly. "Something you haven't told me yet?" Elena nodded sadly. "If you choose to use this technology, if you undergo the transformation to become a multidimensional being, you will never be able to return to your old life. But you also won't be alone. I would stay with you, teach you how to exist between dimensions. We would become partners in protecting Earth. David realized what Elena was really asking him. She wasn't just offering him a way to save humanity. She was offering him a chance to join her in a form of existence beyond normal human experience. The choice was impossible: remain human and watch his species face destruction, or sacrifice his humanity to become something powerful enough to fight beings that consumed entire worlds. As David stood in that lab surrounded by alien technology and impossible choices, he understood that his simple life as a computer programmer was over, forever, no matter what he decided. 3 months later, David sat in the same coffee shop where everything had started, but he wasn't the same person anymore. He looked normal enough: same face, same clothes, same habit of working on his laptop in the corner booth. But inside, everything had changed in ways he was still trying to understand. He stared at the notebook in front of him, filled with equations that seemed to write themselves. The math was so advanced that it hurt his brain to look at directly, yet somehow, he understood every symbol perfectly. His quantum consciousness research had exploded beyond anything he'd ever imagined possible, making breakthroughs that should have taken decades of work by entire teams of scientists. The strange part was, David couldn't remember how he'd figured out these solutions. He had vague memories of working late nights in his apartment, of making incredible discoveries, but the details were fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream after waking up. What he did remember clearly was that his life had become much more complicated. His co-workers at the tech company had started treating him differently. They said he'd been acting strange for weeks, talking to himself during meetings and staring off into space like he was listening to voices only he could hear. His boss had suggested he take some time off to deal with whatever stress he was going through. David's family was worried too. His sister called every few days to check on him, saying he sounded different on the phone, more distant and distracted. His few close friends had stopped inviting him to hang out because he kept canceling plans at the last minute, claiming he had important work to do. The truth was, David wasn't sure what was real anymore. Sometimes he felt like there was someone, just out of sight, someone important he needed to talk to, but when he turned to look, no one was there. He had dreams about a woman with starry eyes and glowing skin, but when he woke up, he couldn't quite remember her face. As David sat in the coffee shop trying to make sense of his notes, he overheard 2 customers at the next table talking about the news. "Did you see that report about the weird electromagnetic readings?" one of them was saying. "Scientists are detecting strange signals coming from space. They're saying it might be evidence of intelligent life." "That's probably just space junk or solar flares," the other person replied. "I don't believe in all that alien stuff." David's head snapped up. Something about their conversation felt important, but he couldn't figure out why. He closed his notebook and decided to go for a walk to clear his head. Outside, the evening air felt different somehow. David had been noticing this for weeks. Colors seemed brighter, sounds were sharper, and sometimes he swore he could sense the emotions of people walking past him on the street. His doctor said it was probably stress and prescribed vitamins, but David knew it was something more than that. As he walked through downtown, David passed an electronics store with television screens in the window. A news report was playing, and the headline caught his attention. "Global observatories detect mysterious signals from deep space." David stopped and watched as a serious-looking scientist explained that radio telescopes around the world had been picking up structured signals from a region of space beyond the outer planets. The signals appeared to be some kind of scanning pattern, as if something was systematically examining the solar system. "While we cannot confirm the source of these signals," the scientist was saying, "the mathematical precision suggests they are not natural phenomena. This could represent the first concrete evidence that we are not alone in the universe." David felt a chill run down his spine. Something about this news report felt familiar, like he'd heard it before in a dream. He pulled out his phone and did a quick internet search for more information about the mysterious signals. What he found made his hands shake. According to the reports, the signals had first been detected exactly 3 months ago, the same time. David's memory had become fuzzy about his research breakthroughs. The scanning pattern was moving systematically through the solar system, getting closer to Earth each week. David hurried home to his apartment, his mind racing with questions he couldn't quite form into words. In his apartment, he went straight to his desk where he kept his research notes. But when he opened his notebook, he found something that made him sit down hard in his chair. There, in his own handwriting, was a message he didn't remember writing. "They're coming. The technology is ready. You chose to forget, but you need to remember now." David stared at the message, trying to understand what it meant. He flipped through the rest of his notebook and found pages of technical diagrams for devices he'd never seen before. The drawings showed complex machines that seemed to blend advanced electronics with crystal-like components. At the bottom of one page was another note in his handwriting. "Quantum Consciousness Bridge, Operational Parameters for Dimensional Defense Grid." None of it made sense to David, but looking at the diagrams gave him a strange feeling of déjà vu, like he was remembering something important he'd forgotten. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Hello?" David answered cautiously. "David." The voice was soft and familiar, with an unusual rhythm to the words. "It is time for you to remember." David's heart started pounding. He knew that voice, but from where? "Who is this?" he asked. "Look outside your window." David walked to his window and looked down at the street. There, standing under the same streetlight where he'd seen her months ago, was a woman with pale skin and dark hair. Even from 3 floors up, David could see that her eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. Suddenly, memories came flooding back like a dam breaking in his mind. Elena, the rooftop conversation, the alien technology, the choice he'd made to save humanity by sacrificing his normal human existence. "Elena," David whispered into the phone. "Yes, you asked me to let you forget the weight of what you had chosen, to let you live as a normal human for as long as possible. But the Devourers have arrived at the edge of your solar system. Their scouts are already scanning Earth. It is time to fulfill your promise." David's legs felt weak as more memories returned. He remembered agreeing to use Elena's technology to become a bridge between dimensions. He remembered the transformation process, the incredible expansion of his consciousness, the moment when he could suddenly perceive reality in 7 dimensions simultaneously. And he remembered why he'd asked Elena to suppress those memories temporarily. The knowledge of what was coming, the responsibility of being Earth's primary defense against creatures that consumed consciousness itself, had been too much to bear. He'd needed time to be normal, to remember what it felt like to be fully human, before accepting his role as something beyond human. "The quantum consciousness bridges are already installed around your planet," Elena's voice continued. "You designed them during the weeks after your transformation. But they need someone who exists in multiple dimensions to operate them. They need you, David." David looked back at his notebook, and now the technical diagrams made perfect sense. He'd created a network of devices that could project human consciousness into higher dimensions, making it impossible for the Devourers to consume. But the network needed a human operator who had undergone the same dimensional transformation Elena's people had developed. "What happens if I remember everything?" David asked quietly. "You will become who you chose to be 3 months ago. You will gain abilities beyond normal human limits, but you will also become isolated from ordinary human experience. You will see reality as it truly exists, which can be both wonderful and terrible." David closed his eyes and thought about his sister, his friends, his simple life as a programmer. If he accepted his transformation fully, he would lose all of That forever. And if I don't? He asked. Then in approximately 6 weeks, the Devourers will reach Earth and consume the consciousness of every living thing on your planet, including everyone you love. David walked back to the window and looked down at Elena. Even from 3 floors up, he could see her clearly, her skin glowing softly in the darkness, her star-filled eyes looking up at him with a mixture of hope and sadness. "Will you stay with me?" David asked. "After I remember everything. Will I be alone?" "I will never leave you," Elena replied softly. "You saved my people by giving us a world to protect. I will spend eternity helping you protect." David took a deep breath and made his choice for the second time. "Okay," he said. "Help me remember who I really am." The moment David spoke those words, his mind exploded with returning memories and knowledge. He remembered the feeling of existing in 7 dimensions simultaneously, the incredible sensation of being connected to consciousness throughout the universe, the weight of knowing that billions of lives depended on his success. But he also remembered something else. Elena's hand in his as they worked together to save 2 species. The growing love between a human who had transcended humanity and an alien who had learned to feel human emotions. David smiled as he looked down at Elena, finally remembering what he had chosen to become and why it was worth any sacrifice. The real David Chen was ready to save the world.